As more and more time passes, it becomes more and more likely that Kellen Moore is the New Orleans Saints' next head coach. We got all of that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I've got some Senior Bowl standouts from day 2, including a podcast favorite who continues to shine. Changes upcoming for the New Orleans Saints defensive system could potentially help work them out of some bad habits on that side of the football. And we're going to kick everything off with Kellen Moore, who is looking increasingly more and more likely to be the New Orleans Saints' next head coach. We'll take a look at the argument in favor of that and also a little bit of a counterpoint to that as well. We'll break all of that down on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Podcast Network, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks. Make sure you go and check them out. Download the Prize Picks app. Use the promo code all lowercase LOCKEDONFL. Get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. As more and more time passes, it feels like it's becoming more and more likely that Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore will become the New Orleans Saints' next head coach. Why is that the case? Well, there's a couple of things that specifically work in favor of that argument, and there's actually something to keep in mind and to watch out for that serves as a little bit of a counterpoint. Let's get to the things in favor of the argument, as it is indeed looking like the stars are aligning for Kellen Moore to become the New Orleans Saints' next head coach. One of the big reasons why is that the New Orleans Saints waited and waited and waited, not because they wanted to, not because it was a strategic thing to do, but because they wanted to interview Kellen Moore. It was clear that the Saints wanted to speak with Kellen Moore, and the only opportunity they would have been able to do that in person was when the conference championships were over. There was no in-person interview that he was eligible for before then, because in-person interviews did not become eligible for candidates, or rather playoff candidates did not become eligible for in-person interviews, I should say, until January 20th. And that was only if those head coaches were no longer, the teams that they were coaching were no longer participating in the playoffs. That wasn't the case for Kellen Moore, whose Philadelphia Eagles made it all the way to the NFC Championship game and then put 55 points down on the Washington Commanders to make it to the Super Bowl, which they will play in the matter of a couple of weeks. And so it was the earliest that the New Orleans Saints were able to interview Kellen Moore was on that Monday following the Sunday win against the Washington Commanders. And the Saints wasted no time. They got on Gail Benson's private jet. They were in Philadelphia by 6:30 p.m. Eastern time, and then spent effectively that entire evening into the wee hours of the morning, just beyond midnight from what we understand, could have even actually been longer than that, with Kellen Moore in Philadelphia for his in-person interview to be the New Orleans Saints head coach. Then the New Orleans Saints are, some folks came here to Mobile, some went over to New Orleans and all those other things. But the next piece of the puzzle is that the Philadelphia Eagles will be utilizing the New Orleans Saints training camp, or not training camp facility, but the Metairie facility, right? The team facility, as their home base for their practice field as the NFC team going into this week, or not this week, but the week after next upcoming Super Bowl matchup. But during that time, the Saints won't be able to speak with Kellen Moore. They can't do what the Arizona Cardinals did and get in trouble for a little bit of tampering and all those other things. They have to avoid all of that. So the only thing that the Saints can do now is wait, or at least nothing can become official until after the Super Bowl has concluded when it comes to a hire for Kellen Moore. So that means that the longer and longer that this goes, and the more and more time passes, the more likely it becomes that the New Orleans Saints have just been waiting to hire Kellen Moore. Now, I won't say this entire time, because I don't know that Kellen Moore was their number one choice, right? There was a big pursuit for Aaron Glenn. There was interest in Mike Vrabel, these other things that were reported. But if he's the top candidate now, they have no choice but to wait to hire him. But there are other options. Interim head coach Darren Rizzi, New York Giants offensive coordinator and assistant head coach, who's also the national team head coach here in Mobile, Alabama, where I am right now for the Senior Bowl, Mike Kafka. Defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins, Anthony Weaver. All of them are available to be hired now, today, yesterday, nearly a week ago. Like, they could have made those decisions a long time ago once those in-person interviews became an option on the 20th. And so the Saints have now allowed 9 days to pass since those in-person interviews got started with guys like Anthony Weaver and Mike Kafka. They had already held their in-person interview a while back with Darren Rizzi. And no hire has been made, even though they could have hired one of those guys. The only one that would necessitate the New Orleans Saints waiting even this long, let alone longer, is if they were intending to hire Kellen Moore. So that's why you're seeing a lot of these numbers, or a lot of these fingers kind of point towards Kellen Moore going, oh, that must be the favorite. We broke down the Mike McCarthy situation in yesterday's episode, but as a quick refresher on that, Mike McCarthy withdrawing from the New Orleans Saints head coaching search when there was no interview scheduled seemed to indicate that he's focused on the 2026 coaching cycle, because if he focused on the 2025 coaching cycle, there's a chance that he gets passed up on here in New Orleans for his former assistant in Kellen Moore, which then damages his 2026 reputation. And that's why he said, I'm going to focus on the 2026 head coaching search. Now, that's my speculation. Okay. That's my speculation. It's me filling in some blanks, reading between the lines, all those other things. And so I think that too, the McCarthy exit from the conversation, is another thing that could be indicative of the interest in Kellen Moore as well. So all the stars are aligning for it to potentially be Kellen Moore. Now, what's the counterpoint, right? There is a counterpoint here, and it's a big one. Darren Rizzi has yet to accept another job as a special teams coordinator or assistant head coach somewhere else. Remember, he interviewed for the New Orleans Saints head coaching position, vying to go from interim to full-time. He said Alvin Kamara publicly vote his way. Cam Jordan effectively back him up. Every assistant coach that you talk to on the coaching staff says that they love what Rizzi did. Somebody told me about how how he made certain nights like open and everything like that for them to be able to bring in family and everything, and how that kind of helped generate a lot of buy-in and kind of showed a little bit of a connection between Rizzi and the New Orleans Saints when it came to their connecting on the basis of humanity, right? Treating them like human beings as opposed to pieces of the puzzle, gears on the grind. You know what I mean? And so those little things move the needle for some of these guys. But Rizzi, who could take a job anywhere that he wants, has not taken a job yet as a special teams coordinator and has not departed from the New Orleans Saints. Now, some people have wondered, could Darren Rizzi stick around in New Orleans and take a job with the New Orleans Saints and effectively stay as a special teams coordinator and assistant head coach? There's two things with that. Typically, interims don't accept a demotion down to their original position to stay with the same team. If they're going to take a demotion and go back to their original position, they're going to do it somewhere else. And typically speaking as well, new head coaches don't necessarily want the interim guy that was just in charge still hanging around the building while they're around. That's kind of I'll call it the storyline version, the narrative version of it. But let's look at some of the recent interim head coaches. Thomas Brown for the Chicago Bears took over as the interim head coach. Chicago Bears hired Ben Johnson. Now Thomas Brown, tight end coach and pass game coordinator with the New England Patriots. You look at the New York Jets, Jeff Ulbrich, who took over there after they moved on from Robert Saleh inexplicably. He's now in Atlanta with the Falcons as their defensive coordinator. So this doesn't happen very often. Could it happen? Sure, anything's possible. Will it happen? I doubt it, but it could happen. So we'll see exactly what happens with Darren Rizzi. But I expect that if he's not getting the job here in New Orleans or over in New Orleans, then he is likely headed somewhere else. Denver makes a ton of sense for him to potentially head over there. So, but the bottom line is right now, most of the signs, despite that counterpoint, most of the signs still seem to be pointing towards Kellen Moore as the next New Orleans Saints head coach. But we may still be waiting for another week and a half, couple of weeks before we really, really see ink go on paper, right? A contract gets signed. So we'll see where things go as the days continue to roll along. Coming up next, Texas A&M defensive end Shemar Stewart had a huge day here in Mobile, but some bad habit shedding for the New Orleans Saints could keep him off of their radar. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back at all, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can get your taxes done as soon as today. An expert who gives you and your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on everything else going on in your day. An expert who will help you find every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so that you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert today at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only available on the iOS mobile app. For guarantee details, see TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, family, there are some shoo-in potential first-round pick defensive ends for the New Orleans Saints. Stop me if you've heard this before, here in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl. But I do think that a new defensive system, which is expected to be on the way this season, could potentially lean the New Orleans Saints away from some of the bigger mistakes that they've made in the past in terms of not just the talent that they've invested in, but perhaps more importantly, the usage of the talent that they invested in. Stop me if you've heard this before. A defensive end, 6'5", 281 pounds, doesn't really have a lot of production in college, just 1.5 sacks in each of the last 3 seasons. It's 4.5 sacks over the course of a collegiate career. Senior Bowl standout. All that should sound very familiar. And oh, by the way, first round pick. That's kind of who Shemar Stewart is right now. And listen, I'm not here to talk bad about Shemar Stewart. I think Shemar Stewart is a fantastic talent, and he blew up day 2 of the Senior Bowl. A shining star, an absolute dominating day for the Texas A&M pass rusher. However, the New Orleans Saints have not proven their ability to invest in that kind of talent that doesn't have a ton of production, that has all the tools, the size, the skill set, all those things, but still needs refinement, still needs to be able to be put in better situations, and still needs to develop as effectively a project. The New Orleans Saints have not proven to be equipped to transition that type of player to the NFL level and get them going when drafted in the first round. Grab that guy as an undrafted free agent, and the New Orleans Saints with Carl Granderson, bam, got it done. He's on his second contract, right? His 3rd contract at this point. He's on yet another contract extension. So here's the thing that I look at with all this. The Saints, in as recent as 1 year ago, would be a team that we would look at and go, yeah, he's going to end up with the New Orleans Saints because he checks the size box, he checks the height box, he checks the speed to power conversion box, he checks the, oh, he's a project, we can build him, right? If you build it, they will come, like all this other stuff. That has been the mold of New Orleans Saints defensive ends. Peyton Turner, you look at Isaiah Foskey, other investments that they've made even beyond that when it comes to, edge rushers and undrafted free agency like Carl Granderson, all that stuff. Marcus Davenport, of course, was one of those guys. But now the Saints are expected to have a new defensive system in New Orleans. And we've discussed a lot about the possibilities of what that system could look like. More usage of speedy pass rushers, more athletic second-level players like linebackers and things like that. But even beyond looking at just that in terms of how the prototypes could change, how the roles might change, right? So in the scheme, which is what the defense as a whole does, you need specific roles. For the New Orleans Saints in their previous scheme, the role that they needed at edge rusher was an edge setter, an edge defender, somebody that was just as good against the run as they were against the pass. That was kind of a bigger, still athletic, because you're trying to get the athleticism. You're trying to get them more athletic than the offensive line that's in front of them, but not as athletic as the quarterbacks, of course, that are out there. And then, of course, still having sort of the big body speed to power transition won't win as a speed rusher or a quick pressure, but will win with second and third efforts while the defensive backs take away the first and second options for the quarterback. That was the plan. And so the role was that of an edge setter as opposed to a pass rusher or a speed rusher, let's call it. And so the prototype for an edge setter also very different than the prototype of a speed rusher. Shemar Stewart, who just dominated day 2 of the Senior Bowl, is a quintessential prototype for an edge setter, 6'5", 281 pounds. But that might not be what the New Orleans Saints are looking for, depending upon what their new defensive system requires of them. Who would be the defensive coordinator that could travel with a Kellen Moore? Well, how interesting would it be to just steal a potential Super Bowl staff? Hire Kellen Moore as your offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore does something like brings his brother from Missouri to be his OC or something like that, right? You've got Kellen Moore as your head coach. I think I might have said offensive coordinator earlier. My apologies. But you get him as your head coach. Maybe he brings his brother along to be his OC or something like that, because you don't need a play calling OC, right? You can have a younger guy that you develop that he trusts, that speaks the same language, all this other stuff. Then you bring Vic Fangio along from the Philadelphia Eagles. Unlikely. But if we entertain the hypothetical, you can see how much then that the defensive system would change. All of a sudden, Zach Bond, who was a draftable talent and was a good talent to invest in and select in the NFL draft, it's just the way that he was utilized didn't maximize the things that made him draftable here in New Orleans. And so now all of a sudden, you have a system that supports guys like that. And then all of a sudden, you end up seeing some more of these smaller pass rushers, second level attackers, and all these other things become actual viable fits for your defense because the role is different and therefore the prototype is different. Let me give you another example of a guy that's been connected to the New Orleans Saints a lot. And this is Georgia edge rusher Michael Williams, 6'5", 265 pounds. And stop me if you've heard it before. Sack numbers. 5 last year. 4.5 the year before that, 4.5 the year before that. Okay, some production there. But these are some of the things that were described and some of the language that I've seen in some of his scouting reports, talking to folks, things like that. His get off described as subpar by NFL.com. Lane integrity and gap discipline, big concerns in the run game. Can't deal with that. Late recognition is another one that was in his NFL.com scouting report as well, and something that I've confirmed with some other people. And so is that really the kind of player you want to invest in at number 9 overall when you have so many needs across your team and absolute opportunities to grab immediate impact players that could be starters for you right away and not developmental players that you're hoping eventually live up to their first round talent? No. You shouldn't be drafted in the first round to hopefully eventually someday live up to your first round talent. You should be drafted in the first round because you are a first round talent and you can get on the field now. That's what the New Orleans Saints are in need of. Now you listen and you talk to some people here in Mobile, and I think even Jim Nagy talked about it, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, that a lot of teams only have like 9 or 10 first round grades all told in this year's draft. It is a very shallow top talent draft this year, which is one of the reasons why I constantly talk about during the regular season that, hey, having pick 10 versus having pick 8, not a huge deal when it came to that final game of the season. So you might as well go out there and try to win that one. They didn't, but you might as well go out there and try. Wouldn't hurt you, because not everybody, even let's say all 32 teams had only 9 first round grades. Not every one of those 32 teams has the same 9 first round grades. And so, more than likely, you're going to get one of those 9 first round grades drafting at 10. Now they're drafting at 9, happy medium, they're all good. The Saints are in position to grab an impact player that should be a starter for them right away. These guys, great tools, super developmental pieces, bottom of the first round, back half of the first round types. The New Orleans Saints need to focus on proven, productive, and promising. And that's what the New Orleans Saints should do at 10. And that's one of the reasons why I love that this New Orleans Saints New Orleans Saints defensive system, and scheme are going to be changing going into 2025, which will allow them to avoid some of the bad habits that they've built over the course of the last recent few years. All right, coming up next, I want to take a look at some of the other Senior Bowl standouts, including a podcast favorite who continues to shine and changes the mold at one of the most important positions in football. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at Game Time, the easiest and best place to go to buy last-minute tickets. If you're somebody like me and you like to plan moments in advance, going to the Sugar Bowl for, barely even $20 not too long ago, thanks to Game Time, because I was able to grab the tickets the day of the event and all that. They even sometimes sell tickets all the way down to like an hour after the event starts and all that. They've got flash sales. They've got hot deals. They have Game Time Picks, which curates all the best deals. You can see your view from the seat before you buy them. You can toggle on all-in pricing so you're not taken by surprise by any fees by the time you get to checkout. It just doesn't get any better than Game Time. So take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Amongst the Day 2 Senior Bowl standouts was a podcast favorite at one of the most important positions in the game of football that could help the New Orleans Saints completely revolutionize the way that it is that they approach their pass rush. Doesn't have to be this player specifically. The mold of this player, the prototype of this player, though, is something that I think the New Orleans Saints desperately need, which is a speed edge rusher. We were just talking about kind of the bigger guys that can go out there and be those edge setters and edge defenders. Well, how about the guys that can win with bend, get around the edge, be faster than the guy in front of them, be more athletic than the guy in front of them, and close in on a quarterback within 2.5 to 3 seconds. And also, by the way, knock the football out of that quarterback's hands in order to get the ball back to what could be another electrifying offense if things go as planned in the coming years for the New Orleans Saints as they rebuild their team and try to revitalize their franchise. Well, in Day 2 of the Reese's Senior Bowl here in Mobile, Alabama, once again, Donovan Ezeiruaku of the Boston College Golden Eagles was absolutely outstanding. He was awesome in Tuesday's practice, and he was awesome again in Wednesday's practice. Daniel Jeremiah and other draft experts have Ezeiruaku ranked within their top 50. I think, if I remember correctly, Lance Zierlein has him at like 28 or something like that. Daniel Jeremiah and Lance Zierlein, I think, have him at 28. And rightfully so. I get it. He's 6'2". He's 240 something pounds, but 82 3/8 inch wingspan, 34.5 inch arms, which is in the 84th ish percentile up there. Humongous reach and length for this guy. It helps massively. And when you can also not just outreach the offensive lineman in front of you, but be faster, get lower, get around, bend, run the arc, and do everything with the speed, agility, and athleticism that an Ezeiruaku ends up bringing to your team. It is so hard not to fall in love with a guy like this from the football perspective. And again, whether it's him in particular, whether it's Abdul Carter, who's a similar style of pass rusher, whether it's a Mike Green from Marshall, who also continues to stand out here in Mobile, whatever. Josiah Stewart coming out of Michigan and all that. There's a lot of these guys that check this same similar kind of mold, similar kind of box. The UCA pass rusher out of Central Arkansas as well, David Walker. So there's so many of these types of players that could end up having a major impact for New Orleans right away. And so I just wanted to shout out my guy out of Boston College who continues to produce, continues to impress. And we talked about it. Production, promise, and some other P word that I said earlier. I sounded so smart when I said it. And I swear that was off the dome. Those were just bars. All right. So that's why I don't even remember right now. But whatever those 3 Ps were, that's what it is that you want. And that's what you see from a guy like Ezeiruaku, who had 16 and a half sacks last season. Yeah. We talk about 1.5 sacks in each of the last 3 years, 4.5 sacks all told. No. Give me the guy that had 16 and a half and use him right, because you've eliminated the scheme that puts those players in the situations where they can't do the thing that they were drafted to do, a la Zach Bond, who had 12 and a half sacks at Wisconsin, and it was brought to New Orleans to be a say it with me, off-ball linebacker. Come on. Come on. So now that you see guys like this, even a guy like Jalen Walker out of Georgia, I can't even believe that I forgot him, right? Another guy that you could draft and have him actually rush the passer as a stand-up pass rusher, switch to a 3-4 type of a situation, or even just a multiple front situation where you can maximize some outside pass rushers and all those other things. One of your pass rushers is a 3-point stance. 3-point stance. There we go. 3-point stance guy. The other one's a 2-point stance guy. Whatever. Those are stand-up edge rusher. Fine. Whatever. Jalen Walker's another one. That would make a lot of sense coming out of Georgia. Speaking of Georgia linebackers, another guy that stood out big time was Smael Mondon. Mondon comes in. What's his measurable sitting at? 6'2", 229 pounds. So a little bit undersized, or a little bit light. Let me say it that way. A little bit light, not really undersized. 6'2", 6'3". Great for a linebacker. But here's what I like about Mondon: sideline to sideline speed. Dude just moves. And here's the thing too, is that he has been able to transition that speed to power. I like that in a linebacker. If that's your only move as a pass rusher, you might have a problem. But as a linebacker, getting off of blocks, running through blocks, running backs trying to step up and stop you in the backfield, you can run through those linebackers and get to that quarterback, then bang, that's where a guy like Mondon absolutely ends up stepping up. And he is one of those guys that should be a really good coverage linebacker as well. So he might not necessarily be out there first, second, and third downs, but in those obvious passing situations, his ability to get sideline to sideline, which can also, by the way, help you out in terms of limiting some of the quarterback mobility concerns that New Orleans has had over on the defensive side. This is where guys like Mondon end up having big time opportunities. The thing that you have to look at here, though, foot injuries in 2023 and 2024 that caused him to miss considerable time. Okay. So you got to make sure that the medical's clear and all those other things, but he looked really good Wednesday throughout the practice. So I'm all about that. Another guy that wasn't a standout, but that it's a really interesting one. Missouri offensive lineman Armand Membu. He ended up leaving this practice because of an injury, illness, all this other stuff. He struggled quite a bit on Tuesday, and then ended up leaving the practices. So that's going to be a really interesting one to kind of see what that ends up doing to his stock. I think the combine's going to end up being really important for him. He's an interesting guy. There's a lot of conversation about where he plays. He played 30 games for the Tigers at right tackle in Missouri. But a lot of people see him as a potential first-round pick that could play on the interior too. And so that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. Guard, tackle, all that. 6'3", 332 pounds. So put him on the inside, on the interior. Like if he can operate in that phone booth, not a bad situation, but just stinks to not be able to see him maybe impact his stock a little bit more here. So hopefully he gets an opportunity at the combine. One last guy that I want to mention, it's another trenches guy. Emory Jones out of LSU. Played right tackle for the Tigers. I think he's going to be an interior offensive lineman in the NFL. They tried him out at left guard today. I'm just saying. They tried him out at left guard on Wednesday, and he looked really good. Real physical. Him and another New Orleans native actually did one-on-ones at the end of the day to see who won best 2 out of 3. Emory Jones won. Depends on who you ask. Sorrell might say that he won. So, it is what it is. But that was cool to see, like, Baton Rouge native, New Orleans native kind of going head to head there. That was a cool moment. And so, but I really liked what we saw from Emory Jones, who is a guy that at the very, very beginning of the season, you looked at as a possible first-round pick to replace Trevor Penning over at the right tackle spot. But now as time has rolled along, it seems like he's really comfortable. I think it was Matt Miller who said he seems like he's really comfortable at left guard, maybe most comfortable at left guard. New Orleans Saints need a left guard. I'm just saying. I know the connection between LSU and the New Orleans Saints has been like once every 9 years. Well, it's been a minute. So if it's going to happen, it might happen soon. And a guy like Emory Jones could be a nice addition for the New Orleans Saints. We're looking for athletic offensive linemen, especially if they do hire Kellen Moore. That run game is going to be such a big focus, and you need to get one or two more of those offensive linemen to really start to maximize what it is that you're doing there. Emory Jones could be a name to watch, although I think that the Saints are going to be better off addressing their offensive line in free agency and then draft for depth in future. And that's still a place where Emory Jones could make sense because of his versatility and ability to play in multiple spaces. All right, there you go. Senior Bowl Day 2 standouts. A change in the Saints defense, potentially steering them away from some bad draft habits. Not really draft habits, but bad habits of what they do with the guys that they do draft. Let's say it that way. And then as more and more time ticks away, it becomes more and more likely that Kellen Moore is the guy. So we'll see where things go here over the course of the next few days. Coming up tomorrow, day 3, Senior Bowl standouts. We'll give you those, and we'll also continue to take a look at what's going on with that New Orleans Saints coaching staff as well. So a ton here over on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us and making us your first listen. Go and check out Locked On NFL as your second listen today. And we thank you for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust to that nation, I'll holla at you.